every image I take, I'm looking for that sense of awe, right? I want to be awestruck. And if I can capture that sense of being awestruck on the camera so that someone else can share that and be like, oh, wow, what a moment, then that's fantastic.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian Plant, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, the very famous YouTube celebrity, an excellent landscape photographer, and legitimately one of the coolest guys I've ever met in my life, Mr. Gavin Hardcastle. Gavin, welcome.
Well, thank you, Ian. So none of that was true. Celebrity, amazing photographer. So that's how we're going to base the rest of this interview. It's all complete fiction. I appreciate that. That's really good.
And I didn't necessarily put them in any particular order. Like, I view you as a photographer / YouTube celebrity and not the other way around. You're definitely a very fantastic photographer, and I'm honored to have you on to talk with you today and to learn more about you and your photography and the process that you engage in when you're making photos in the field.
Yeah, that means a lot to me, Ian, because these days, I tend to get labeled with that YouTuber thing before the landscape photography thing. And first and foremost, that is what I am, a landscape photographer. Without that, there wouldn't be any of these YouTube videos. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Well, let's dive in and talk about your landscape photography. Let's start off just learning a little bit more about you, where you're from, where you're now based, and how you got into photography.
Well, I'm originally from Yorkshire in England, a wonderful town called Huddersfield. And I'd always wanted to get into landscape photography, but it was just something that I kind of observed from a distance and never really had the opportunity to get into. And my previous career was as a musician and a music producer. And I produced a lot of music libraries and sample libraries. And that career, because it was internet-based, allowed me to leave the UK and live in Canada. So I moved to the most beautiful part of Canada, which, well, I guess that's debatable. A lot of people might argue about that, but it's more beautiful to me, and that is Vancouver Island. And so I was able to transplant what I did to Vancouver Island, and then as the years progressed from once I'd arrived here in BC, that's when my photography really started to kind of take over every amount of emotional and intellectual and creative energy that I had. And the music career just kind of gradually faded away. And I kind of made that transition professionally in 2013. But living on Vancouver Island is well, it's a treasure trove. I mean, we talked about this when we met in Oregon, and you were saying that you had challenges because of where you are. You often have to travel to different locations to go and do photography. And I mean, that's what we all do, but it is quite the luxury to have all of these epic shooting locations within a few hours driving distance from my house, some of them even within 30 minutes.
What was it about photography that really grabbed you? Like, what is it that caused you to say, you know what, I want to give up everything else and just dive right in and do this for a living?
Well, there was two aspects to what, made me do that. And I think first and foremost is as an art form, as a creative, whether you're a musician, a writer, a dancer, a filmmaker, whatever it is, if you're a creative, if you're an artist, you need to do something that satisfies that creative desire. I personally think, I think I would go crazy if I couldn't create, right? So as long as I'm creating, I'm happy. I'm in a good place. And so it almost doesn't really matter where you take that creativity. But I'd done the music gig for 20 years professionally. And when you do the same thing for 20 years and you have these other interests, you kind of, I wouldn't say I lost interest in music, but I kind of lost interest in making music. And so what sucked me into photography is that it was just as creative as making music, but it was so very different in that you had instant results almost, because with music, especially music production, I might spend a week or more working on one song. and so there's a lot of technical aspects to it. You can become obsessive about audio quality and the sounds that you use. You can spend days tuning one snare drum on a drum kit just to get that perfect sound for a song, right? Whereas with photography, you show up to a spectacular location, and if you know how to compose a shot and if you get good light, you instantly have a wonderful piece of art that took as long as it took to hit that shutter. Now, of course, you may have hiked for 12 hours, you may have driven for 3 days, but I don't know, the actual creative part of the process is more immediate than music. So I was very, very drawn to that. And then I also love that the aspect of processing your images. A lot of people complain about, oh, I can't be bothered to process my images. I only enjoy the photography part of things. And I understand that, but I think as soon as people, because I've seen this in the students that I teach, as soon as they start to grasp a basic understanding of what they can do with their beautiful images that they shot, what they can do with it in post, all of a sudden there's like a nuclear explosion goes off in their head and they realize, oh wow, so I can have a second shot of creativity. Not only did I get creative out in the field and capture this beautiful piece of art just like that, but now I'm back in the studio and I can load that up and I can change things and I can tweak things and I can make that vision really come to light or represent that vision more accurately, according to what you saw at the time. And that's that other thing that I love about photography is you get that second burst of creativity. And again, it's far, far quicker a result than writing songs. And then I think finally that the other thing that pushed me over the edge to go into photography, and this is perhaps the most important aspect to it, is that connection with nature. And being a city boy, I was raised in a city. I feel like I lost that connection to nature round about the time I was a teenager, because when I was a boy in England, I don't know if they do this anymore, but boys back then, we would be outside all day, running around, playing, going through forests and just being outside. So you had that connection to nature, but as you grow up, you lose it, right? You have to work, you have to have a career, your life changes. You don't have that freedom that some kids used to have back then. So throughout my music career, I was locked in a studio, often without windows, often, an acoustically treated room that was very dead. You don't have the windows open because you don't want bird sounds coming into your recordings, right? So it's quite an isolating experience. Even though my creativity was satisfied all of the time, that was fantastic. But I was completely disconnected from nature, and I didn't even realize that was a problem. And so what happened, because my career was quite good for a while there with the music thing. For the first time in my life, I had a little bit of money, and so I could travel, right? And I'd never really traveled at all throughout my youth till I was in my mid-20s, late 20s. And then all of a sudden I could afford to travel. And that was when I think it slowly started to dawn on me how disconnected from nature I'd become. So on my travels, I would get to go out and go on these safaris and stuff, and I went to Australia and I went to the US and Canada, went all over the place and looking for natural wonders. And so as you become more connected to nature, you start to realize how intolerable not being connected to nature is. And you have this shift, you have this desire to move away from that. And so I think it was a gradual process. I pulled myself out of the recording studio and into the forest. And I think since I made that decision, life has just been so much better, and if you can satisfy your creative needs while you're out there on a mountaintop or in a forest or on a beach or in a volcano or whatever it is that you're doing, if you can go out into nature, connect with nature, and then also satisfy your creative desires, what better sport is there than landscape photography?
So you contrasted your experience in the studio, where you may be spending a week to get something finally produced, with the experience being in the field, where you're out there, and if the light's good and everything's working, you can create a piece of art in a very short period of time. It almost sounds to me like like you're the kind of guy, the kind of photographer who is really just more immersing yourself in the landscape and seeing what it has to offer and reacting to conditions on the ground, rather than going through the process of meticulous planning and picking out a shot and going back over and over again to get the perfect shot. I know there's kind of two different camps here. You know, some people tend to be more planners. Some people tend to be people who react more to what's going on. I tend to fall into the latter category myself. I'm curious how you would characterize your photography. Do you plan more or react more? Do you do a mix of both? What's your strategy?
I think there is no strategy because we're chasing the weather, Ian. We're always chasing the weather. So there are certain weather conditions that you can predict exactly what kind of shot you're going to get, because you'll go to a location that you know will work specifically for that kind of weather. So if, for example, if I go to Scotland, it's often rainy in Scotland, right? So there are lots of locations that I know will work probably better in awful rainy conditions. And so I guess in that regard, there's some strategy there. It's almost like a safety net. But when it comes to anything else, you know, whether you're shooting crashing waves, you need a storm for that. Whether you're shooting Milky Way, you need clear skies for that. Or whether you're trying to capture light rays, well, you need pretty much clear skies for that and lots of moisture. So the conditions have to be perfect. I've found that those types of shots where you get those perfect conditions, they were never planned. They were just reaction shots. You know, they were just like, I showed up hoping for something, not really knowing what I was going to get. And then something happens and you react to that. So I think I would say that the reaction shots tend to be the best because you didn't know what you were going to get. You perhaps had low expectations and then bam, out of nowhere, you get this fantastic epic sight that you never imagined you would even see, let alone capture. So I would say that if I had to say which type of photographer I am, I would say it depends. If I'm teaching workshops, I tend to take people to places that I know are going to almost guarantee them good shots, because as a workshop instructor, you feel like you have a bit of a responsibility to deliver, right? So that's why I take people to the places that I go to. But then when I'm doing my own photography, that's when I take risks. I'll go somewhere without any planning whatsoever, just show up and just react. And it's quite fulfilling when you get that perfect moment from that reaction. But as you know, more often than not, we come home empty-handed.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't even take the camera out of the bag, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And there is something really fulfilling about, going through that process of discovery and finding something that you're pretty confident no one's ever seen before, and having it all come together when you've got that perfect cloud, that perfect light that just fills the sky and complements whatever it is you found in the foreground. Tying that all together can be very satisfying, definitely.
Well, nothing beats that photographer's high, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you show up somewhere and not only do you see the perfect composition, like the shapes, the objects, the story, it all lines up and you're like, oh, you get almost like this Zen moment hits you and it's like, oh yes, it's happening. And then if you're super lucky, in addition to that composition, and just as important, light will happen. You'll get some kind of dynamic light that comes into the scene and lights things up in a certain way. And when you can capture that, I can be on a high for like 2 or 3 days. If I capture that moment, not only just witnessing it, like that's a high in itself, but capturing it and knowing that you've framed up this exquisite composition, that's the ultimate high for me.
So tell me a little bit about why you're drawn to night photography and what sort of challenges you face, and what is it that you're looking for when you're making your night photographs?
Well, I think with night photography, you're still looking for the same thing that you're looking for when you do daytime photography. Every image I take, I'm looking for that sense of awe, right? I want to be awestruck. And if I can capture that sense of being awestruck on the camera so that someone else can share that and be like, oh, wow, what a moment, then that's fantastic. But I think with night photography, there's that, there is that sense of awe when you see that many stars, which most people don't get to see. Most people aren't photographers, and most people don't go out into wilderness areas and stand under the stars. So I love to capture that sense of awe, but then if I can also compose a shot that has some other subject that is also awe-inspiring and that makes you really look at that image and think, wow, I mean, that's an awesome place, but to get that place under the Milky Way with so many stars, what a magical combination. So that's why I like astrophotography, Milky Way photography in particular. But it definitely is less reactive than all of the other types of photography that we talked about, because you do have to plan what you're going to put in front of the Milky Way. And I think once you've spent a bit of time planning, okay, here's what I'm going to position in front of the Milky Way. Once you have that and you're on scene and you're comfortable and you know that you've got a shot, then you can start to get creative and reactive with lighting the scene in different ways. And that's actually one of the things that I talk quite a lot about on this course that I've been working on with Michael Shainbloom. And that is when you're light painting a subject, whether it's a rock, a tree, or a person, once it's completely dark, you decide. You have total control over where the light goes. That's not what you get with daytime photography. So you can be reactive and it can be very spontaneous, but because you have a light source and a subject, whether it, like I said, if it's a tree or a person or even a vehicle, a tractor, whatever it is, you get to decide how that looks. And as long as you're fairly quick at what you do, the background, which is the Milky Way, doesn't move too much. I mean, it's gradually working its way across the sky, and you have to be mindful of that, because if you forget, the next time you look at it, whoa, it's over there, But you can predict it, right? So you know which direction it's going, so you can adjust your compositions for that. But I do love that aspect of astrophotography where you get to control the light. It's almost like a godlike power, right? In the daytime, you don't get to do that. At nighttime, it's like, okay, I need a little bit of light over there. Let's go and paint that. And I think I need to have a little bit of light over there. Oh, and let's make this tree really stand out by going around the back and backlighting it so it's got that lovely rim light on the edges. That's a powerful ability to be able to draw the viewer's eye to a specific spot with light. You can only really do that at nighttime with landscape photography.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about one of your photos. You sent me a bunch of photos for this interview, and one really stood out to me. I really loved it. And I think part of the reason why I love it is because it's composition driven. So it's a photo you took underneath a curving tree trunk in a forest, and there's some beams of light in the background, just a little bit of mist catching the light. And I just love the way the tree curves around the background scenery and frames that background scenery. Tell me a little bit more about that photo, where that was taken, and your thought process behind it.
Yeah, so that's down at Botanical Beach here on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And the composition is very similar to a composition that I stole from Adam Gibbs. So, and the only reason why my composition's a little bit different to Adam's is because his shot, which is a lovely shot, was during a rainy day. And so he didn't get that lovely rim light that you can see on the edge of that branch in the top of the frame there. And so I composed mine much wider and featured that beam across the top more. And of course, I was really lucky. I got these shafts of light that came in. And so I was there for about 20 minutes. I'd framed up this composition. I didn't know that this beam was going to light up quite so much, and I had no idea that I was going to get light rays. And I was looking out towards the ocean, and we could see this bit of mist slowly working its way in. And I was just on the edge of quitting. Like I'd waited around for a while. There was somewhere else I needed to be, and I was just on the edge of saying, forget it, let's go. And then we could see this mist rolling in, and it was a bright sunny day. And whenever you get mist and bright sunny days, you get light rays. So I thought, okay, it's going to come. So I got back down on the ground, checked the shot, and sure enough, for about 4, maybe 5 minutes, those light beams were just blasting in, and you could see them moving. You know, that's how rapidly that mist was moving in, and it was one of those moments where I actually was shaking a little bit. I was so excited about this shot, and I think that shot encapsulates the two most important aspects of landscape photography, which to me, I would say that they're of equal importance, and that is composition and light. You know. And like I said, I composed it for the light. If the light hadn't been like that, perhaps I would have composed it in a different way. But if you can get those two aspects to work together, where you compose something that the shapes and the forms all move together in a beautiful way, and they tell you that story of the depth of that forest, the shapes of these trees, the way that the light moves in, and then you can wait for that moment of light. You know, anyone who's been in that position could have taken that shot. It's just one of those moments, you know. So I was probably on a high for 2-3 days after that one.
Understandably so. And it seems to me that in a lot of your shots, you see this atmospheric effect, this light beam effect, and I'm guessing that that's actually a pretty unique local weather effect that you find in the rainforest along the Pacific coast. Talk more about that, the importance of understanding the local weather and incorporating that into your process when you're in the field making photos.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of like we talked about earlier. It's kind of like adapting and reacting. But each one of these places where I go, where you do see light beams, I can tell you honestly that they don't happen all the time, and the percentage of time that you'll go there, you might take 20 images of that location and never get those exact conditions. And I've even done it where I've gone back to somewhere, let's say I've gone to a place and I've got perfect light beams, and then I've studied the images after I've got home and thought, that composition would have been better if I got a little bit lower. I'll go back tomorrow. And you go back tomorrow at the exact same time, and it's not the same. Because to get light beams like the ones that I typically get in my images, that one that we just saw was mist. It was ocean spray.
Okay.
You know? So you have to have just the right amount of wind, not too much wind, because if you had too much wind, it would blow that mist away real quick. You have to have just enough wind that it creates a little bit of ocean spray, and then you have to have sunlight. And so some of the other shots, I don't know if you want to load up, let's say the liquid gold shot of Little Qualicum Falls there. This shot here where you can see these giant beams coming through the tree, that requires a specific water volume so that the spray from the water, the crashing water, you know, goes up into the air. And of course it requires a sunny day. And I went back there about a week later with a client. The conditions were completely different. Even though it was a sunny day, the water levels were less, there wasn't as much spray, and there wasn't a single light ray to be had. So, you know, you can go looking for these things, but unless you repeatedly go back over and over and over again, you might get lucky and catch it on your first time, but I've been to these places so many times and not seen these conditions. And that's why these end up in my portfolio, because they're the more remarkable versions of shots that I've taken in the past. And it's that, I guess what we talked about earlier was that sense of awe that you sometimes get. Well, that's what makes that image remarkable compared to if I'd done the shot 2 days earlier with no light beams. It would have been a nice shot, but it's not a phenomenon that you're viewing. So I think anytime that you can view a phenomenon, it wakes up that sense of awe in the viewer. And that's what I'm always trying to capture.
I'm looking at your photo of the Old Man of Storr from the Isle of Skye in Scotland. And it's really interesting because I've seen a lot of photos of this place, and yours is the only photo I've seen from this particular angle. And so I guess I'm curious, when you're shooting a famous icon, something that's photographed a lot, how often do you like to try to get a different take? What's your approach when you're photographing a famous icon like this?
Oh, always. My objective is always to try and get a different viewpoint. But I think what you almost have to do, especially if you've never been to a location before, is you have to pay homage to the classics. You have to go to the spot where everybody else shoots it from. You have to go and see what, even if you don't take a picture, you have to go at least see from that angle and understand where you are and understand, where this object is in space. And then it's almost like a process of elimination where you say, okay, so this is where that shot was taken. I don't want that shot. So you don't take it, or you do take it, whatever you want to do. But then the first thing I'll do is I'll walk all around, and often you'll see a completely new angle just from walking 100 feet off the standard trail. But then I'll sometimes think, what's it like from up there, or what's it like from down there? And so you'll walk further away from your subject, leave the subject alone, go elsewhere, and try and come at it from a different angle. And this shot, I'll be honest, I actually found that composition. I think I saw a guy on Flickr take a similar shot years ago, not quite the same spot, a bit lower down. I think I saw that maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I thought, I want to get a drone and fly a drone up there and find that angle that he took, and then I want to take it to somewhere else. So it was inspired by another photographer who, not the same angle, but he was not too far away from it. So years later, when I had a drone, I took a drone up there and I flew it into this area where I think his shot was. And then I thought, okay, well, I don't want to copy his shot, but I want to see further up. So I went further up with the drone and I found this angle. So I actually took this shot about, not this one that you're looking at now, but the same composition about 2 years ago with a drone, and I logged it in memory. It was like, okay, so the next time I get up there and I get those foggy conditions, I'm going to try and hike up there. And so that's what I did. I followed there wasn't a trail. You're basically walking up a talus field, so it's Broken Ankle Central. And then that's how I got that shot. And I was so happy to get that dingy light. I mean, most people hate that kind of light. And again, there's a whole video about this shot on my YouTube channel about how I got off the beaten path. And you can see, like, if you look in the distance, you can see the trail. It's only, I don't know, a 10, 15 minute hike away down this slope. And I was the only person up there. Nobody was there. And I think that's partly because when I headed up there, it was just mist. I was walking into a cloud. So if you were a new photographer that didn't know about how quickly the weather changes, or you've never been up there, you might think, well, there's no point me hiking up there. I'm just going to be hiking into a cloud. I won't see anything. But I think experience teaches you to take those risks and get off the beaten path and go in the opposite direction to the thing that you think you want to shoot. And it paid off, and I got these lovely conditions. And that is one of my favorite shots because it's just so moody and dingy and dark. And that's why I love Scotland, because even with that awful, miserable, almost depressing weather, it still looks beautiful. It's still spectacular because of that grey, miserable, awful weather. I mean, how many places on earth do you have that same beauty even in the worst of conditions? Not that many.
Let's talk about your approach to composition. Obviously, composition is something that we could spend hours, days, weeks, months talking about. It's a very complex subject. But kind of briefly, what would be just a short primer about how you approach composition? Or how would you tell your students on a workshop, for example, the sorts of things they should be looking for when they're making a visual design?
Yeah, I think my approach to composition is very, very simple. And the thing that I always tell my students is, you have to ask yourself the question, what am I taking a picture of? What is this about? What is the subject? Most of the time, when you do see a very striking landscape image, the subject is very obvious. It's very clear. Whether it's like the Old Man of Storr there, or whether it's a castle or, a specific tree, there's usually some main subject, and I use this analogy quite a lot where I talk about, I kind of compare landscape images to the stage. Imagine if you were on a stage, or you were watching a stage show at the theatre. There's usually a lead actor who is then surrounded by supporting actors, and the lead actor is the one that's telling the story. The story kind of centers around that lead actor. And I think landscape photography is the same thing. So number one, you have to have a clear goal. What am I taking a picture of? Ask yourself that subject. And then I think once you've determined, okay, I'm taking a picture of this beautiful castle or whatever it is, then you kind of have to think, okay, well, how can I make it more interesting? How can I tell a little bit more of a story about this castle? So let's just take, for example, the famous Eilean Donnan Castle in Scotland. There's this beautiful bridge that leads up to the castle. There's these mountains in the background. And then if you're lucky and the tide is up, you can get these reflections. So, you could take 20 photographers to the same location. They're all going to get a picture of the same subject, which they've all determined is this castle. But the better results will come from those people that have said, okay, well, I accept I'm taking a picture of a castle. How am I going to make this more interesting? What am I going to put in front of this castle? What am I going to put to the side of this castle? Will I frame the castle by getting under one of the arches of the bridge? Or will I try and find a reflection in some tide pools? And once you've decided that's my subject, now I'll spend some time figuring out what is most interesting in the environment that I've got. So whether it's the bridge, whether it's the tide pools, whether it's a sea creature that you can see on some rock, or is it the way that this algae is catching the light? Whatever it is, you have to look around the environment and try and find something that is almost as interesting as the main subject, as let's say this castle. And then once you've found that, you can tell the story in a more powerful way. You can have more engaging elements in your composition that make people want to stare at it for hours because there's so much going on. That's my basic sort of, it wasn't that quick, but that's my basic kind of philosophy about composition. And that's towards more the wide angle lens. It's far more difficult to compose things in sort of like central focal lengths, round about the sort of 70 to 150 millimeter range. Those are far more challenging. And I would say to people, I don't know if you saw Nick Page's video a few weeks ago. Nick Page did this video talking about composition and how he tends to shoot more towards the super wide or the super telephoto because he finds that that's more impactful. There's a more wow factor. And while I agree with him, as an artist myself, I have set a personal goal when it comes to composition to do the exact opposite of that, because everyone's shooting super wide, everyone's shooting super telephoto, because Nick's right. They give you the best results, right? They give you that wow factor just like that. But in a sense, it's almost low hanging fruit, right? It's almost too easy. Anyone can do it. Not everyone can find those mid-range compositions that are exquisite. And I've failed at it more times than I've succeeded. But when I do get it, which is not that often, and I think you should set personal goals as a photographer, and especially when it comes to composition. But when I do succeed at seeing that whole thing that I just discussed, where here's my subject, here are the supporting actors, here are the things that support this beautiful subject. When I do get that in the mid-range focal lengths, it's so much more rewarding, because it's like, yep, I've achieved something that I thought was really quite difficult. And it's quite satisfying when you get that. If you were to sort of look at Gavin Hardcastle portfolio and try and kind of see if there's a theme that weaves its way through each of those images, it's that I'm trying to find things that are either very rare moments in time, such as when light rays hit, or a bit of mist gets caught, or that sense of awe where it's just like, wow, I wish I was there at that time. I wish I could see that in those conditions. And one of the things that I try to do is show images or create images that if somebody was dedicated enough and they went back to that exact same location at that exact same time with similar conditions, they themselves would be able to capture exactly what I did,
This has been a wonderful discussion, Gavin. It's been really great talking with you and getting your unique perspective, your insights into the art of landscape photography. And I think everyone who sees this is going to benefit greatly from your wisdom. So I thank you very much for joining me today. And I'm hoping that this will not be our last conversation. I'm hoping we'll be able to talk to you again.
Yeah, oh no, it's been your absolute pleasure to have me on, Ian.
It absolutely has. And we talked earlier about your music career. I had the pleasure of listening to Gavin sing and play guitar. It was a transformative event for me. It was just incredible to see someone who's so immensely talented in one way to be also immensely talented in another way. So I felt like less of a man sitting there in the room listening to you play. I am humbled and awed by you, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, I think the wine that you consumed had more to do with your opinion of that than anything else, but I definitely appreciate the compliment. Thank you, Ian.